penalty drama, wet weather chaos, and a bunch of drives ranking somewhere between epic to disastrous. Formula 3 is finally back on the menu. Hello and welcome, fellow motorsports fans. I'll talk you through my biggest winners and losers of the opening F3 round, and of course we'll also talk everything about the rather short F2 weekend, discuss the appropriate reactions to a cancelled race, and much more, so let's get straight to it. F3 was very much a mixed bag relative to my expectations, so while I want to run you through my 6 biggest winners and losers, keep in mind that particularly on the losers side, it is all about what we expected coming into this season. Otherwise, I could just read out the bottom of the standings, couldn't I? But let's begin on the positive side, where, after an admittedly rough Saturday, both Rafael Camara and Noah Stromstedt hit the ground running for Trident. In Stromstedt's case, this is actually a fair bit better than expected, as I wasn't sure if he'll have a proper front-running quality. And for Camara, this not only cemented my expectations of him being a key title contender, but what stood out was the level of wet weather dominance he displayed by significantly gapping the field multiple times during the feature with no competition whatsoever. Next up on the winners list, I've got Van Amersfoort Racing as a squad, considering both Teo Final and Santiago Ramos got a chance to shine for the team, including a maiden podium for Final and a maiden win for Ramos. I was actually a little surprised about that. In my mind he had won a race last season, but never mind. Either way, while Niall's individual level was about what I expected, the car certainly looked more competitive than it did in past seasons. The big question mark here is whether Bruno Del Pino can also step up when he gets a proper qualifying in, but I reckon he can. In some ways, the biggest winner of the weekend for me was Taz Interpuvazak. Not just for outperforming his highly anticipated teammate Nikola Zolov with ease, we'll get to that in a minute, but also for the way he was driving with visible confidence at every step along the way, going for daring overtakes like nobody's business. I've said in my preview that you should pay more attention to the guy, but I certainly did not expect him to rise to that level. I very much hope he can keep this up. 2 quick ones to end on, with Matthias Stenshorn and Roman Belinsky for their sprint race podiums. For Stenshorn, his own ability was of course never in doubt, but I didn't have too much faith in high-tech, so I'm glad he could put his name out there immediately. While for Belinsky, it was the perfect feel-good story to start the year after he was probably the biggest question mark for Odin coming into this season. Stenshorn, as he's now known, also joins the list of people whose names are pronounced correctly by the commentators. Forgive me for not joining the trend consistently. But this begs the question why nobody has ever told them to drop that H from poor Olli Goethe. Now to the other side of the coin, because if we have big winners, there unfortunately have to be big losers as well. And while both Camara and Stromstedt looked great for Trident, returning driver Charlie Wirtz looked a bit lackluster in comparison, to be outdone by not 1 but 2 rookie teammates. It sounds harsh, but for someone aiming for the title, this wasn't cutting it. It's a short season, so he definitely needs to step up quickly. Similar story, albeit with less expectations for the team, for the previously mentioned Nikola Zolov. As a third-year driver, anything but a close title fight will be considered a failure, so being bogged down in the mid-pack while his less experienced and also less rated teammate put on a proper show at the front was a pretty bad look overall. We did have big losers on the team front as well, as not 1 but 2 prominent outfits let their drivers down in my opinion. Both ART and Prema seemingly dropped the ball, making it a rough day for a bunch of potential title contenders like Tuukka Taponen and Noël Léon. ART especially was nowhere to be found in both wet and dry. Prema looked outgunned as well, continuing the trend of issues we've witnessed across a lot of Prema operations last season. At least here both Léon and Yugi Chukwu got a chance to look alright individually, while Bado Air was a thorough disappointment well at the back all weekend long. Not to be mean, but there is 2 more individuals I want to highlight in this negative way. Louis Sharp and Christian Ho. Both came into this with high expectations, not in a title fight sense, but at least in the context of their respective teams. Sharp admittedly was alright, but considering I've seen people throw his name around as the best driver below F3 last season, a take I have by the way not agreed with in the first place, we do have to say being stuck in the midfield while Bielinski is out there fighting for podiums wasn't the greatest look. I'll be the first to admit that it was mainly Bielinski's overperformance making him look bad though. In Christian Ho's case, he was just properly back marking all weekend long and also put it in a wall by himself. For somebody with budget issues, this is certainly not the way to start your campaign. He may be in a mediocre car, but he also has mediocre teammates to match that, so he should not look like the worst of them. With all of this said, I am well aware that this was only a single round and most of these dynamics could be flipped on their head the next time these cars hit the track, especially considering Albert Park is by far the least practiced track for all of these guys. But for some of our losers list, the pressure is already building. Who were your biggest winners and losers? Let us know down in the comments. The Formula 2 weekend was of course cut short by the weather, but at least we had a decent sprint race to discuss on Saturday. I'm mostly annoyed that we thus literally punished people for qualifying well, like poor Victor Martin or Gabriele Mini. I can't take anything away from Joshua Dirksen, leaving any engine-related speculations out of the picture. We already know he can control a race from the front if he happens to get track position, and he did show it again here. Also, an excellent debut from Leonardo Fornaroli. Well, I guess it wasn't quite his debut, but you know what I mean. But here we do have to remember that poor Roman Stanek did beat him in quali, so this alone can't count as a win in the Invicta team battle, I don't think. The highly anticipated high-tech duel, I did call them the strongest lineup in my F2 preview video, which is linked up here somewhere, went Luke Browning's way after the pair essentially matched each other in qualifying. This one counts a lot more as Dino Beganovic did spin himself out of the points while getting a bit spooked by Stanek. With one race less overall, these sorts of mistakes might come back to bite him later in the season, but on the bright side he very much had the sort of excellent pace I had expected. My biggest disappointment was ART, more specifically, unfortunately yet again, Ritomo Miyata. The former Super Formula champion still just hasn't quite figured out this whole F2 thing by the looks of it. Even though this track should in theory be more favourable to him than the European ones, as nobody has much experience around Albert Park. Teammate and championship hopeful Victor Martin also made a costly error to wreck out of the race, something he certainly can't afford as a third year with the title his only goal, but at least he showed a much bigger upside by qualifying on the front row and just got robbed of a chance to make up for his error. We can't go through every single driver, but I think Prema deserves a quick shout out, first of all for actually having a quick car as a team, something we very much can't take for granted anymore, and second of all for the rookie driver pairing to extract sad speed from the machine. Especially Sebastian Montoya competing reasonably well with Gabriele Mini was quite a surprise for me. I had expected the Colombian firmly outside the points, to be entirely honest. For anyone jumping to conclusions though, don't forget he only had track position because of the reverse grid, and overtaking looked super difficult for everybody, so the team dynamic I still think very much favours Mini, and the qualifying pace gives me hope that we could see another classic Mini versus Beganovic title fight this year. This rivalry is probably the longest standing one currently on the F1 ladder, and if the teams allow it, it'll surely be an epic one for us to watch. Last but not least, a couple of words regarding the cancelled race. As always, there have been quite a few voices on the social medias calling the FIA pussies and demanding to let them race. Well, I think we can all agree that some races, especially in F1, have been red flagged a little too often for rain in the last couple of years. There are a few things to keep in mind before giving into the outrage. First, we shouldn't hold the junior categories to the same standards as F1 when it comes to safety. There is a big difference between highly paid professional athletes and a bunch of youngsters hoping to one day join those ranks. Second, and more importantly to me, it isn't just about driving with a lack of grip. It is the lack of visibility that, depending on how it is dealt with, is either incredibly dangerous or prone to put on a horribly boring race with everyone just fighting the track and not each other. If they let them race and all the drivers were sensible enough not to crash, I think we wouldn't get a product worth watching either. So while it is a shame that you only got the admittedly hilarious duck cam instead of a feature race, please always remember to show some respect to the drivers that go out there and risk their health and lives for glory and ultimately our entertainment. I know you guys watch this channel for the feeder series content and not to be one of a million mediocre F1 channels, but there is no way I can just ignore the huge rookie class we're witnessing this season, so I will keep including it, but I'll try to focus on the younger half of the grid. Although as a Verstappen fanboy, I am obliged to point out the masterclass of maximizing points we've got to see from him as well. I've been waiting for Kimi Antonelli's arrival in F1 for many years now. Me getting all hyped up for this kid is part of the reason why this channel exists in the first place, and therefore I could not be happier about his amazing debut run all the way to P4 while casually pulling off overtakes left, right and center. You'd be blind to say something bad about that charge, but some people have been calling out his qualifying, so I'll quickly address that. Mercedes did him dirty by starting them on mediums and then pulling him back into the pits before the tyres reached their operating window, essentially leaving him with a single proper run to make it to Q2. And while there was some driver error there, he really wasn't set up to succeed in that session, so even that isn't a legitimate talking point against him in my opinion. Obviously we've had some meme-worthy incidents as well, Isaac Hadjar presumably breaking a record by crying before his first ever race even got to start, to just name one, so both him and Doohan remain nearly impossible to judge. Both qualified alright, and the conditions were so incredibly tricky that nobody was safe from mistakes. I think we can forgive those two. Similar story for Gabriel Bortoleto, even out-qualifying Hülkenberg and driving a decent race until finally also making his particular mistake. I still think it stands as an alright debut in my book. Ollie Behrman may have been a little too error-prone this weekend, but to be honest, Haas was a dumpster fire all around. It wasn't really a big part of public discourse as far as I can tell, but Esteban Ocon running dead last all day means we really can't read into Behrman either. This leaves Liam Lawson as the hot point of discussion. While I think Red Bull is once again putting an absurd amount of pressure on the guy, never mind the fact that he shouldn't be in this seat in the first place, I've discussed this multiple times last year, he is still experienced enough in F1 already where these sorts of total disaster weekends really shouldn't be a thing. Not moving forward at all during the race while Kimi showed that it would have very much been possible was a pretty shocking look all around. I think he'll bounce back from this, but equally I don't expect him to live up to Red Bull's high standards, so maybe Tsunoda will finally get that shot he absolutely deserves at this point. And he very much made sure to put himself in the shop window this weekend, even if it wasn't rewarded with points. Unfortunately, that was already it for the Formula Racing action of the week, but we also had the first big international title decider of the year for our quick weekly karting report. The WSK Supermaster Series has concluded, which means 6 drivers can add a new title to their Insta bios, and naturally they deserve some attention here. In the Mini Under 10s, Ukrainian youngster Platon Kovtunenko wheeled his Energy Course chassis to the top step, while American youngster Josh Bergman completed this rather dominant campaign with a P2 to comfortably take the title. Incredible breakout season if you ask me. I had barely ever noticed the kid before. But then again, I may also be blind, we will never know for sure. In the Mini Group 3, Xavier Lazaro had a bit of an off weekend in contrast to the last excellent rounds, as the rising star from Portugal was stuck at around P10 all race, while young Nicolo Perico ended up taking victory with a great piece of racing in the last few laps. Somehow, someway, the young Italian has thus managed to win his first championship in the category against all odds. In the OKN Juniors, the category that largely seems to serve as a cheaper rookie campaign in the junior chassis, Williams junior Lucas Palacio has secured the title with relative ease while running away at the front of the field. I have criticized this pickup at the time, and I do stand by my stance that signing kids straight from the minis is a bit too early, but he has certainly proven to be an exciting pickup for the future. I hope he will join the OK Juniors for the Europeans and not stick with this slightly lower level for the entire season. In said OK Juniors, the title fight was actually decided post-race in slightly underwhelming fashion between Prema duo Noah Baglan and Dean Hoogendoorn. The consistent Dutchman yet again struggling a tiny bit for pace compared to his excellent form in the first few rounds. Meanwhile, Baglan put in quite the fight to work his way up to P2 ahead of Devon Waltz, securing just enough points for himself to briefly clinch the title as Iskandar Zulfikari passed Hoogendoorn for P5. Unfortunately for Baglan, the Turkish driver subsequently earned himself a 5-second front fairing penalty, giving the position back to Hoogendoorn post-race and thus just about allowing him to take the title for himself. Looking forward to the Europeans though, even when ignoring the potential for incidents, it is far from certain that both drivers will be in the title hunt given the insanely competitive nature of this class. The OK Seniors title fight was all set to be an epic duel between Parolin ace Christian Costoya and McLaren junior Dries van Langendonck, only for Costoya to end up shoved off track in the opening stages of the race, allowing van Langendonck to essentially cruise to the title, even if he still worked hard to make his way up to the podium. In this category though, I am certain we'll get a very similar looking rematch during the Europeans. And last but not least, in KZ2 the title was pretty much safe for Zenna van Wolstein coming into the weekend, but we still got treated with some wicked racing at the front. Finally the rematch from last year with Christian Bertucca fighting wheel to wheel with Formula K ace, the team formerly known as Maranello SRP, Marcus Kayak, all while running slicks on an increasingly soaking wet racetrack. Kayak initially looked like he had the upper hand, but Bertucca just about kept getting faster and faster, flying by Kayak to retake the lead and ultimately winning the race in dominant fashion, while Kayak suffered a DNF in the closing minutes. It may have been a tiny grid, but it put on a show like you wouldn't believe. Go check out this race for some wet weather masterclasses. And that was already all the action from this week. Next week we'll finally get our first female race winner of the year as the F1 Academy will kick off in Shanghai. Unfortunately, this seems to be the only reason we get female winners at the moment. And of course there will be lots of other action as well. But for now, it is your time to drop your opinions down in the comments so we can get our lovely little discussion going. And otherwise, I thank you all for watching and I do hope to catch you in the next one.